The first day of true NFL free agency just wrapped up. I want to go over some of my favorite acquisitions for teams of specific players, not really going over this as a team-by-team sort of thing. At the end, I will have my 3 favorite overall free agencies for specific teams, but for right now, we're just going to take some of my favorite signings, and I'm going to talk about those, some of the most impactful signings. Not really including trades, except I will say the first one is a trade, but other than that, this is mainly just signings, not re-signings, just free agency signings. To start it off, like I said, starting this off with a trade, the Raiders trading for Geno Smith. I thought this was a fantastic move for them. It didn't make a whole lot of sense for the Seahawks to do this, but after seeing them sign Sam Darnold, which I will talk about in a minute, there's some clarity there as to why they did this, but for the Raiders, I really love this move. Getting a guy like Geno Smith who's going to keep you winning football games and is going to keep you in contention, not contention for the Super Bowl or anything like that, but contention to be competitive and, like I said, win football games. As much as, some people hate Geno Smith, some people love him, this guy can win football games and he can do it with a lot of pressure being dealt on him. As we know, the last few years on the Seahawks, they had trouble really bolstering up that offensive line for him. So he didn't play under the best conditions in Seattle and still found ways to be clutch and win football games. So I think he's going to bring a lot of that to the Las Vegas Raiders, a team that is lacking a very good roster. But honestly, if we're paying attention to some of the specifics like offensive line, I think the Raiders overall have a better offensive line than the Seahawks. I think that's going to be something that's going to be a game changer for him. This also puts the Raiders in position where they don't have to sell the farm to get a quarterback, and they don't have to reach on someone like Shedeur Sanders in the draft. They can still do that if they want to sit, a Shedeur Sanders or a second-round quarterback like Jackson Dart behind Geno Smith for a couple years to allow them to develop, but they certainly don't have to. They can entertain quarterback for the long-term future next season and just deal with trying to get this roster right and winning football games. Obviously, Pete Carroll being the new head coach, he wanted to go get his boy, who is someone I've been a fan of. So Geno Smith to the Raiders, I thought was fantastic. And then quickly I'll go over Sam Darnold to the Seahawks, which was their plan with trading Geno Smith. Overall, I think you're getting about a similar caliber player. I think the only difference is Geno Smith is older than Sam Darnold, so his future isn't as long-term. But at the same time, Geno Smith has been playing good football for the last few seasons, whereas Sam Darnold has only had this last season for a good body of work in totality. But don't let that, don't forget about the fact that Sam Darnold had a lot of wins this season and played a lot of good football. I don't think that good football was just an accident. So I think Sam Darnold's going to work out fine with Seattle. My one issue with that is we know Sam Darnold doesn't handle pressure especially the best, and especially pressure from the interior, which is one of the main issues with Seattle at the moment. They're going to have to really focus in on making that offensive line better. After all the moves they've made with getting rid of DK and releasing Tyler Lockett, I think people are going to want them to focus on receiver and replenishing that. They will have to replenish that, but to me, their number one fix that needs to be addressed on offense is going to be that offensive line, especially with Sam Darnold, someone that doesn't handle pressure all the best. So that's what I think about those two there. But moving on from that trade and that signing, something I really loved was Morgan Moses to the New England Patriots. This was a 3-year contract for $24 million, an absolute steal. This has been a top 10 probably right tackle for the last few seasons. He's bounced around a bit, but Morgan Moses has been as solid as they come at the tackle position for a while now, and I feel like he's never really gotten the respect he deserves. For the Patriots, a team that has had an abysmal offensive line for the last few seasons, bringing him in for this cheap is going to set them and Drake May up for success for the short term. I know that he's a little bit older, and this isn't, like drafting a Joe Alt where you have a full decade of dominant tackle play ahead of you. But with Morgan Moses, this is a really big issue for the Patriots that's getting slightly absolved for a little while until they can find those more long-term answers. But I still see Morgan Moses playing really good football for those 3 years that he's there. This is a signing I loved for them, and I actually liked a lot of the Patriots signings. We'll go over that more later, but Morgan Moses to New England was definitely one of the top ones. Moving on to another offensive lineman signing, we have James Daniels, who signed with the Miami Dolphins, a 3-year, $24 million contract, similar to the New England Patriots. James Daniels is coming from Pittsburgh. James Daniels was dealing with some injuries and wasn't on the field the entire 2024 season, but over the last few seasons, he's been a really solid guard and swing tackle when he needs to be. The games he did play and the snaps he did play this season as a run blocker was one of the most efficient players in the league. Pass protection was about average, but I think a signing like this, especially if you keep him on the interior, is going to be really important for Miami. But with Teron Armstead's health and how you're only going to get about 10 to 12 games with Armstead, I wouldn't be surprised if this is their fix to have someone that can play guard and start there, and then when Armstead is out, swing James Daniels out to left tackle and have a solution and a Band-Aid there until they have a long-term fix for Armstead's health and his future in the NFL. Overall, I think Miami Dolphins have been one of those teams that has only paid attention to flash, signing and getting receivers on offense and edge rushers and cornerbacks on defense, and has forgotten about the more fundamental and important parts of football, like the interior guys, the offensive line, the guards, and even the tackles, the centers. Those are some of their weakest positions. The interior, their defensive line, has been a struggle as well. I like Calais Campbell, but that's about it. Although I don't want to discuss their defensive line and all the issues they have going on right now, I do want to keep this just on James Daniels, who I think is a phenomenal offensive lineman in general. Is going to do a really good job in Miami for them. And with a similar contract to Morgan Moses, 3 years, $24 million, that's another bargain I think they're getting. Moving on to a defensive lineman, Josh Sweat, getting signed by the Arizona Cardinals for 4 years, $76.4 million. I wouldn't say this is an overpay, but it is a lot of money. But I think this is an important signing and an important allotment of cash flow for the Cardinals. This has been a really big need for them to add actual talented players onto their defense, and especially their defensive line. Now, this last season, their coach Jonathan Gannon actually did a lot of good stuff with the players that they had on defense, with the roster that they had, which was in a lot of ways next level bad. But despite having not the best players, he made the most of it, and this defense played really solid, especially towards the latter half of the season. The Cardinals came in as a team that I thought was going to be all offense, no defense, but as the season went on, it looked like they were more of a defensive team with struggles on offense. So actually bringing in Josh Sweat, who is a very good edge rusher, and making him a potential true number one edge rusher on this team is going to be really important. It also alleviates some of the stress of the younger and other edge rushers that they have, like Zaven Collins, who isn't really good pass rusher, but is a really good athlete with a really nice coverage ability that plays some of the best run defense at that position in the entire league. It takes some of the stress off of him of having to be a number one pass rusher off the edge. He can just go play his football. Josh Sweat can focus on rushing the passer. So I think that's a really great signing for them. I don't think it's an overpay. It is a lot of money, but this is a Cardinal team that needs to deal out that kind of money if they want to have success this season. And coming off of a season like this where they played probably past expectations, I think adding some talent like Josh Sweat is going to be huge. On to our next defensive lineman here. Out of 3, this is Milton Williams, signed by the New England Patriots for 4 years, $104 million. I mentioned that I would be talking about the Patriots a decent amount this episode. That's because they had a lot of cap space and they had a lot of roles to fill, and they decided to do that in free agency this year. No one less than Milton Williams, who was probably the premier defensive tackle in this free agency class. Now, this is him coming off of a breakout season. He's been a solid, 4-3 piece, rotating in and out for the Eagles last few seasons. This year, he truly broke out as a potential true number one defensive tackle, although he won't necessarily have to be that here in New England. Despite all the struggles that New England have, they do have guys like Christian Barmore, who is going to alleviate some of the pressure of being a true number one defensive tackle from Milton Williams and just let him go play ball. Now, this was, like I said, a 4-year, $104 million contract, so it's nothing cheap, especially for a defensive lineman. This is about what I thought Milton Williams was going to end up with. It's a little bit more than I thought, but like I said, the Patriots had the money to do this, and although this wasn't an exact need, I think it was important that they addressed this, especially with the health issues that Christian Barmore had this season. I think it was blood clots he was dealing with, which is kind of scary. It's not the same as like, a broken ankle, which has a pretty normal timetable. Blood clots is something that, can kind of stick around for the long term. So bringing in Milton Williams and truly bolstering up this defense is a really solid move for this team overall. I think Panthers fans were really hoping to get Milton Williams, but Patriots just had way more money to make it happen. So I'm excited to see what Milton Williams does with the Patriots. On to our next and last defensive lineman I'm going to talk about for right now, Jonathan Allen getting signed by the Minnesota Vikings, 3 years, $60 million. I'm going to start this off by saying that I do think this is a slight overpay. It was going to be impossible not to overpay Jonathan Allen given his history as being a top of the league defensive lineman, interior defensive lineman. He was going to demand that kind of money, especially since he's had that kind of money and asked for that money and gotten it is basically his entire career. He is coming off of a pretty down year. The last couple seasons haven't been phenomenal from him, but towards the end of this season, especially in the playoffs in that Lions game, he played his best game of the entire season. Now, I do know he was dealing with injuries throughout the year, so that was a big reason why he wasn't playing up to the standard he normally does. But regardless, I still have hope and faith that Jonathan Allen is going to come back and play really good football, especially since I mentioned that he was dealing with injuries and that towards the end of the year he was playing good football. I think we're going to get that version of Jonathan Allen more than the downside of a Jonathan Allen that we've seen lately. And for a team like the Minnesota Vikings, who had a phenomenal defense throughout this season and was just missing a couple pieces like interior defensive linemen, I think you're bringing in Jonathan Allen, a guy who can two-gap and play really solid run defense while adding a little bit to the pass rush game, which is something they definitely need. Although I don't think it's an incredible need for them to have him be a premier pass rusher. They have the ability to rush the passer with the outside linebackers and edge rushers and all the blitzes and stunts that they do. They have the ability to do that with other guys, so I think they're going to want Jonathan Allen to play more of a very traditional role, and like I said, just be able to two-gap and play really good run defense. So although I do think this is a slight overpay, I think it's an overpay that had to be done. I don't think Jonathan Allen was going to go anywhere for less, so this is just what his value was going to be. And this is me kind of banking on what I think Jonathan Allen could be for this next season as opposed to what he was this last season. So still a signing from the Vikings that I really liked. Next up, moving off of the defensive line and into the linebacker core, this is the only linebacker I'm going to talk about for now. That's Dre Greenlaw, signed by the Denver Broncos, 3 years, $35 million. One of the reasons I really like this contract is that I think it's a little bit cheaper than I was expecting Dre Greenlaw to go. Now, linebackers aren't getting astronomical money. They really never have, except for like in the 80s. But with Dre Greenlaw and his skill set, what he was on, with the 49ers, I was expecting him to get a little bit more money than this. But I think the Broncos got him at a solid price, 3 years, $35 million. That makes enough sense. And for a team that really needs an interior linebacker, an off-ball linebacker that can play the kind of level run defense that Dre Greenlaw does and be able to pass coverage in that Sean Payton system, I think it's really important, and they have a really good athlete there. Now, there is the issues of Dre Greenlaw, dealing with injuries and stuff. I think they for sure made this signing knowing that and knowing that he was coming into this season healthy and feeling good. So The Broncos are another team for sure that I'm probably going to mention as having a really good free agency, and this is one of the reasons for that. This was kind of a sneaky good signing for them. They have a lot of other things they'll need to and will address, but this is a really good place for me to start talking with the Broncos. Next up, moving off of linebackers, getting into some secondary with cornerbacks, probably one of the biggest steals in free agency, and one that should kind of piss off fans that aren't of this team. DJ Reed signing to the Detroit Lions, 3 years, $48 million. I honestly don't know why exactly DJ Reed was able to sign for this amount. Not that $48 million 3 years is nothing, but I thought he could have bargained for a little bit more in free agency, especially with how many teams were in need of cornerbacks. But man, this is perfect for the Lions and what they want to do on defense. They want to play that in your face man press coverage defense that allows them to blitz up front and do all sorts of weird stuff. And although DJ Reed is a little bit smaller, this is what he likes to do. He's a nasty cornerback. He's kind of like, a honey badger, not Tyrann Mathieu, but his own version of a honey badger. And this is perfect for Detroit at what is a pretty solid contract for them, getting him at a better value than some of the other top cornerbacks that are available in free agency here. Next up, though, we have someone that I think is even better, Charvarius Ward, being signed to the Indianapolis Colts, 3 years, up to $60 million. That's what it said online, so we'll just say 3 years, $60 million, and pretend that's exactly what the number is. But this fills a huge gap that the Colts have that makes me really glad that they made this signing, because they don't have to pay attention to this in the draft. I think that the Colts have a lot of issues that they'll want to focus in the draft, kind of like tight end. I think everyone that's a Colts fan is hoping that they get Tyler Warren or trade back a little bit and get a Colson Loveland. Tight end is a position that is really full in this draft class, and I was hoping they would be able to entertain that as opposed to cornerback, but cornerback isn't something you can ignore. Well, now they signed Charvarius Ward to a 3-year, $60 million contract. Charvarius Ward at times has been in contention for one of the best cornerbacks in the league over the last few years. He definitely has been like top 5 throughout most of it. This season, he struggled a little bit. I'd say the 49ers struggled more than anything, and that his play and his body of work this season was more of just a byproduct of that. Obviously, unfortunately for Charvarius Ward, he lost, I believe it was his daughter, which is one of the main reasons he said that he wanted out of San Francisco. Well, here you go in Indianapolis on a really nice contract here. So I don't want to bring up his daughter and everything too much, but just hoping for the best for him. That's something that sucks for anyone to deal with. So I'm glad to see him have his needs accommodated, getting out of San Francisco where he was dealing with some trauma, and getting a contract like this. But all of that aside, I think that the Colts are still getting a premier cornerback in the league at a fair contract value. Next up is a signing that I think people are going to continually underrate, which is Nate Hobbs being signed by the Green Bay Packers, 4 years, $48 million. One less year, but the same total amount of money that DJ Reed got. Nate Hobbs has been cornerback on the Raiders for since he was drafted. I think it was 3 or 4 full years now. And he's been a very underrated cornerback, in my opinion. I think a lot of people look at that Raiders team and how bad their defense and just overall team was and just write off everyone. I think Nate Hobbs at times the last few seasons has been one of the bright spots on that team, and is a really solid cornerback. And the Green Bay Packers, another sort of similar situation to the Colts, where the Packers are going to want to focus on cornerback in this draft for sure, but now they don't have to make it their absolute number one priority. And if a really good player falls to them in the draft, they can just take him and not have to, reach on someone that they shouldn't take just because they're a cornerback and that's a need for them. Signing Nate Hobbs, maybe he isn't a true number one lockdown cornerback, but this is someone that's going to fill out this cornerback room and make the Packers defense overall a ton better. Next up, moving to safeties instead of cornerbacks, we have Javon Holland. This was probably the premier safety in this free agency class. He gets signed by the New York Giants, 3 years, $45.3 million. Javon Holland has had a very good career since he got into the league. He is coming off of a bit of a down season. Similar to the Raiders, though, the Dolphins just had an overall really bad season, and I think his down play was kind of just a part of that as well. Nonetheless, I think Javon Holland is a fantastic safety, and for a team like the New York Giants, who often has struggles dealing out that money in free agency and for their guys, like someone like Xavier McKinney, who they let go and ended up going to the Packers, getting a replacement style safety to fill what they had with Xavier McKinney last or 2 seasons ago is a really smart move from them. I'm still a really big fan of Javon Holland. I think he's going to work out here. This New York Giants team has a defense with a lot of talented but very young and inexperienced players coming into their second season now as we go into the new year. And bringing in someone like Javon Holland, who has a bit more experience and expertise at the position, I think is overall going to help everyone else that they have on the roster, from Drew Phillips to Cordell Flott to Tyler Nubin. I mean, there's tons and tons of second-year players on the Giants that are going to need a little bit of guidance, and I think Javon Holland provides that. Not at a horrible contract either. $45 million isn't terrible at all. And then last, for all of the players that I wanted to talk about and for the safeties, Talanoa Hufanga signed with the Denver Broncos, 3 years, up to $45 million. I'm just going to pretend like it's $45 million. Again, similar with Dre Greenlaw. Yeah, there are other needs on this Broncos team, but I do think safety was one of them. And Talanoa Hufanga fitting into this system that Sean Payton wants to play, a top-down defense where you have everyone playing off and then coming down and flooding to the ball when it gets thrown underneath. What a better fit for that than a guy like Talanoa Hufanga, who maybe doesn't have the best coverage skills and was at times a little overrated in that department. But what he does do phenomenal is track ball carriers down and make big hits. So he's going to have to clean up some of his missed tackles for that to be his best aspect of being a safety. But I think he fits into the system really well. You're getting him at what a top end safety is going to get, so it's not like it's a bargain necessarily, but I do just enjoy the fact that the Broncos are kind of filling out this roster with good players on the defensive side of the ball, which was one of the best aspects of their team last season. Their defense was phenomenal last year, and the fact that they're still focusing on it and bringing in new really good players is awesome to me. I think that's going to be a benefit to them going into this next season, and they're going to be able to handle some other issues that they have, like tight end and running back, through the draft. I think, like I mentioned, Tyler Warren being an option for the Colts. I think Tyler Warren is a very hopeful option for the Broncos. I think that might be a team that wants to jump ahead and steal a guy like Tyler Warren in the draft. They might be able to do that now that they filled out some of their other needs on the defense, like linebacker and safety. So overall, I think Talanoa Hufanga really fits into this Denver Broncos team. Now, I do want to quickly go over my 3 favorite teams with dealing with free agency this season. The top 3 I have, I think a lot of teams did a really solid job filling out the rosters and adding better players, but 3 teams that I think really needed to hit in free agency that ended up doing so. I'll start that off with the Cardinals, who end up getting Josh Sweat at edge. I talked about him already. They signed linebacker Akeem Davis-Gaither, 2 years, $11 million. That's a pretty solid contract for a linebacker with his skill set. Re-signing edge Baron Browning to a 2-year, $15 million contract, someone that last season didn't really get to come along and play a lot of snaps until the latter half of the season, that they were really excited to get and just couldn't allow him to get involved early with some injuries and the fact that he was just kind of had a slow start when he did come back. So re-signing him when he did show that he is a good edge rusher towards the end of the season to a contract like this, 2 years, $15 million, was a really good move from them. They also re-signed guard Evan Brown, 2 years, $11.5 million. Re-signed Zay Jones. That's a move I'm kind of here or there on. that was a 1 year, $44.4 million contract. And then long snapper Aaron Brewer, don't have much to say there. I know that doesn't seem like a lot of big moves, but I think Josh Sweat, Baron Browning, really focusing in on those edge rushing roles is really important for them. And then Akeem Davis-Gaither, I like at linebacker for them a lot. And a lot of these guys, they were getting at a solid price, if not a discount. Then next up, onto another team which made a lot of really big moves that were important for them. I didn't end up talking about some of these players in the last segment, but I'm going to talk about some of them now. That being the Chicago Bears, who signed center Drew Dahlman, 3 years, $42 million. Edge Deo Odeigbo, 3 years, $48 million. Defensive lineman Grady Jarrett, 3 years, $43 million. Traded for Jonah Jackson, traded for Joe Tooney, signed Durham Smythe, and re-signed a couple linebackers I don't need to talk about. But one of the hugest and biggest issues for the Chicago Bears was their offensive line. But more than anything, it was the interior of their offensive line, like I was talking about with the Miami Dolphins wanting to focus on flash like tackle, not focusing on the interior guys like center and left and right guard. This has been a big problem with Ryan Poles with the Bears. He just hasn't acknowledged this as an important position as long as he's been there, and it's really bitten them in the ass. It bit him in the ass when they had Justin Fields, and he was always running for his life. It bit him in the ass last season when they had Caleb Williams, and he was running for his life every play. And now it seems like he finally understands, okay, the interior of the offensive line is important. Everyone can shut up now. They bring in Jonah Jackson, who I think is a really solid fit for this team and is a good enough player to really fill all those roles that they need filled on the interior. Joe Tooney, who is one of the best guards in all of football and a complete and total winner that's going to hopefully add some pride and value into that locker room. And then Drew Dahlman, who I think is a really good center. He doesn't fit the scheme of everything that Ben Johnson is going to want to do perfectly, but regardless, he is a really good football player that I think Ben Johnson's just going to be able to work around that a bit more. So these aren't necessarily guys that are saving them money, but one of the reasons I do want to put them here as teams that improve the most is because I'd say the biggest issue for the Bears last season over everything in their entire team is the interior of their offensive line and just how bad their offensive line was in total. And they've managed to, if at minimum, make everything average, and that's going to be huge for them going into next season. This offensive line should not be holding them back this season. I know there's still questions of their left tackle, whose name is slipping my mind right now. Braxton Jones. That's who I was thinking of, Braxton Jones. There's still questions about if he's a true franchise left tackle. I think a lot of his issues last season was due to the totality of the offensive line. I think bringing in 3 interior guys that are going to bandage up those issues is going to make him look a lot better than just assuming that he sucks and they should move on from him. Moving on to the last team I'm going to talk about here, the New England Patriots. I mentioned a few of them earlier. I do have one that I had a really big problem with, but I already talked about Milton Williams. Not going to go over that too much, but that was a great signing for them. One of the worst signings they did have was Harold Landry, 3 years, $43 million. I just don't think that was a good player. I think he's struggled a lot the last few seasons in signing him to a contract like this, giving him, that edge rusher 2 money. I'm not a big fan of. I don't think he's going to help this team out a whole bunch. I think that was kind of a waste of a signing. But other than that, they signed Carlton Davis to 3 years, $60 million contract, which is a signing that I really love from them. They have Christian Gonzalez to be their true number 1 cornerback, but then they have Carlton Davis, who also has the ability to play man coverage and get in guys' faces and lock up that number 2 receiver, and that's just going to be a really big benefit to their defense and their team overall. Now, you're not getting Carlton Davis for all 17 or 18 games, depending on what happens, but you're going to get him for probably 12 to 13. He has some injury issues, but again, the fact that they have Christian Gonzalez, they have Marcus Jones, who's a really solid slot cornerback. It's not that big of a deal if he goes down for a few weeks. They'll rotate some of the other younger guys that they have in. But for the time that Carlton Davis is going to be on the field, I think he's going to make a really huge impact on their defense overall and probably add a couple extra interceptions onto their total for the season, which you can't complain about. They also went ahead and signed Robert Spillane to 3 years, $37 million contract, which is awesome for them. Robert Spillane is a total missile, just flying around, playing really great run defense, and being a solid pass coverage linebacker as well. Not that this was the worst thing in the world for the Patriots, the linebacker position, but they did deal with a lot of injuries, and they have some aging vets there. Adding someone like Robert Spillane, who is a little bit older, but plays a veteran role and just, like I said, plays like a missile all over the place, is great for their defense. And then someone else I already talked about as well, who they got a total steal, in my opinion, Morgan Moses. That's a big deal for their offensive line, another veteran that's going to step in and just kind of change the tide on that group as a whole. Kyrus Tonga they bring in on the defensive line. This is a guy that a lot of people like because he is big and strong and can play run defense. He hasn't really been given a lot of opportunities to prove and show himself, and this could be the spot to do it, especially if Christian Barmore and some of the other defensive linemen are going to be injured this season. We'll see how that goes. They re-signed Austin Hooper, 1 year, $5 million. I don't have much to say there. I don't know exactly a whole lot about how Austin Hooper's doing now, but they did it. And then signing Mack Hollins, who's coming off of a really good season with the Bills. Now, this isn't fixing their issues at receiver, but it is adding, like I mentioned earlier, some veteran presence and some help. Mack Hollins, one thing I really like about him is he has a clear and defined way to use him that you can tap into, that some of the other guys on the roster, it's really unsure of how to use them. And, a lot of the receivers on the roster aren't very good to begin with. Mack Hollins is a good receiver that you can throw fades and you can throw some slants and go balls to, and he'll come down with the football. He has really solid hands, and for his size, has solid enough feet. So that's not a huge, crazy signing, but I think Mack Hollins is going to fit in nice to that Patriots locker room. And then bringing in Josh Dobbs as backup quarterback. Not a whole lot there. That's a fine signing to bring in as a backup. We all know Josh Dobbs as being one of the better backups in the league, so why not bring him into the Patriots in case something happens with your second-year quarterback Drake May, or just using him as a way to encourage growth from Drake May. So that's what I liked about the Patriots, and that's what I liked about all of free agency. Let me know what some of your favorite moves from free agency were. What did I miss? What were some moves that you thought were super impactful? Let me know down below in the comments. Bye.